Welcome and thanks for joining us at the OCAD-U Center for Emerging Artists and Designers. I'm Adam and this is Nav, and we're excited to share with you a very quick overview of our project on mutable futures. You may not have seen all of these movies, but you're probably familiar with at least some of them. What do they have in common? They're movies about time travel in which the hero is up against a fatalist future. According to Patrick Todd in his paper titled On Behalf of a Mutable Future, the de facto view of time is fatalistic. The reason, he suggests, is that much of classical physics, including relativity, has philosophical roots in religious notions of fate and predestination, which is explored in Peter Grieche's lecture Providence and Evil. Einstein, for example, mathematically demonstrated that our three dimensions of space, x, y, and z, and the dimension of time, t, are connected as a block universe, which means that everything that has happened and will happen has already happened, and we're simply traversing this dimension like a landscape. The quantum mechanics introduces uncertainty and probability into the model of time that Kurt Moyer describes, where all possible timelines of any uncertainty simultaneously exist, and only when observed do we determine which timeline is perceived as real. This implies that decision has a role here, and decision can be prescriptive or intentional. Popular opinion has it that our current trajectory is catastrophic. But are we really doomed, or can we design our way to a better future? This is ontologically a design-oriented inquiry. There are three big academic influences, besides Dr. Jones here, who I can credit for informing my worldview. Jane McGonigal for her work on games that changed the world, Guy Kawasaki on creativity and innovation, and Steven Pinker on progress. It's a worldview that is fun, innovative, and hopeful, and it's through this lens that we'll be examining our inquiry. The ambiguity and potential scope of this inquiry, though, is massive. We decided to begin by seeing if we could give it some quantifiable shape and size and bound it to three rudimentary dynamics: how much, how fast or slow, and how often did futures transform or alternate between trajectories given active intervention. This data needed to be captured by a framework designed to measure 5 observable inputs. We designed a board game system themed around interstellar colonization that is a model for exercising cooperative strategic foresight on mutable futures. Using the game as a tool for interaction in action-designed research, we collected data from 3 play sessions to codify into a rubric for measuring an organization's capacity to transform and overcome barriers to innovation. Nav claims we didn't know it yet, but I was actually already hatching my long game plan to lay the groundwork for this project, starting in winter 2018, when we created this synthesis map for the systems course with insights from research methods. It was presented at a Systems Thinking Ontario meetup and at RSD7, and informed version 1 of the board game we designed for our independent study. As such, our Lit Review has been a culmination of papers, books, articles, and videos stretching across topics like game theory, game design, science, sociology, and philosophy. Some of the concepts designed into the board game include cognitive limitations and biases, absorptive capacity, bounded rationality, daters for futures, zero-sum and non-zero-sum games, causality, stocks and flows, and coopetition. We then used a value proposition canvas to give ourselves a concise set of design criteria. Some of the key ones were to integrate concepts into an elegant game system, low barrier to entry, i.e. easy to learn, in other words, my kids had to get it, scalable, and have the input mechanisms for our measurements. After a bunch of iterations and testing, we ended up with version 2 of the game. The goal of the game is to build an off-world colony and transform 3 systems to level 4. You do this with tiles that represent different systems of the colony, from essential services such as water and energy, to complex social mechanisms like policymaking and governance. The tiles connect together by a pattern language that indicate their balance of scientific, commercial, military, and civilian influence, and can be advanced by stacking levels on them from 1 to 4. The 4 levels denote future trajectories: collapse, continuation, discipline, and transformation. Tiles cost resources to build and advance, but also generate more resources in subsequent turns. However, the colony's capacity to absorb resources is limited by living tiles. Threats and risks are presented by situation and uncertainty cards. Situations are like obstacles, but uncertainties have 2 different outcomes that can move the game in 2 different futures, much like our quantum model of time. Players play each turn simultaneously, and they can do this cooperatively or competitively. Games have three modes of play. Extinction mode, in which players have a limited time to transform 3 tiles, and time is gained as players advance the tile levels. Flourish mode, in which players aim to transform the highest value tiles. And race mode, in which 2 teams compete against each other. With a high-fidelity prototype produced and our REB approved, we began to recruit participants at the end of October. We used Eventbrite for registrations. We promoted our call for participants through social media, including Slack and Facebook. And we created a blog as a place to provide information about the game, the play sessions, and to track our learning journey. We got just the right number of participants for each session. We ran 3 play sessions, each in different modes, so we could observe how players responded to different motivational drivers. What we were looking for from the data was amplitude, velocity, and inflection. We recorded audio and video of the game board and players' hands as they interacted with the tiles. This was used to audit the turn data and to analyze the sentiment and semantics of their decision-making process. We tracked live turn data using an electronic tracking tool we set up in Airtable. The tool captured duration of each turn, tiles added, capacity of the colony, resources gained each turn, and situations and uncertainties in effect. This was done manually, but we envisioned a tool that could use image recognition to automatically track game progress and reduce margin of error. We also tried to get players to record their own observations on a mobile form they could link to with a QR code, but players found this distracting and decided not to use it. The data we collected was audited, analyzed, compiled, and codified into a matrix. Each matrix tracked turn-by-turn measurements from which we could derive amplitude, velocity, and inflection, standardized on a scale of 40. And we were able to visualize the trajectories of 4 futures in a waveform that shows us the trends of their movements. Here's how each game went. Game 1 had 4 players in extinction mode. 8 turns were played over 25 minutes, with 29 minutes gained, giving them a velocity of 9. They transformed water, fusion power, and power grid tiles, giving them an amplitude of 10, which puts them on the low or essential spectrum of complexity. Only 1 threat came up, and their decision influence was civilian. The inflection of their future outlook was high at 40 and looked like this. The most notable observation was how the perception of limited time made players go for the lowest hanging fruit, even though they were gaining time from incremental progress. Game 2 had 3 players, and they played in flourish mode. 11 turns were played over 72 minutes, giving them a velocity of 6. They transformed sanitation, water, and information network, giving them an amplitude of 16 and putting them in the mid-range of the utility spectrum. They had to deal with 5 threats, and their decision influences were scientific and commercial. Their future outlook had an inflection of 36 and looked like this. We significantly increased the occurrences of threats in this game, which forced players to adjust their strategy more frequently. However, despite these, removing temporal limits freed players to aim high and be more collaborative with their decisions. Game 3 was a 3-on-3 game with 6 players in race mode. They played 8 turns over 62 minutes, with the winning team at a velocity of 5. They transformed food storage, power grid, and fitness, giving them an amplitude of 11 at the low end of the utility spectrum. They faced 6 threats, and their decision influence was mainly civilian. There was a much lower inflection at 30, which gave it a much flatter waveform. Both teams progressed fairly evenly for the first half of the game, but Team A increased their absorptive capacity at turns 5 and 7, allowing them to rapidly accelerate to level 4. This might have been done, though, without paying enough attention to Team B, who had a more conservative trajectory due to their limited capacity. A race against an opponent is different from a race against the clock. Although Team A won, strategically, they lost the opportunity to fully utilize their advantage and transform higher value systems. Challenges and futures often tend to be seen as monolithic. However, we've been able to simulate, in a highly simplified way, how multiple systems in an organization have complex interactions that create multiple polyrhythmic future trajectories. These systems and their trajectories, when tackled individually, can be affected by intervention. Moving quickly, though, doesn't always mean higher payoff, even if you get there first. Steady incremental progress might not solve everything, but what it solves can still extend the time we have to solve further challenges. We assume we're racing against the clock, but we might also be racing against an opponent with a different agenda to us. And being only concerned with our own agenda and not paying enough attention to their strategy could cost us a full victory. It's clear we've only scratched the surface of our inquiry. There's a lot more to discover even with the data we already have, but with a larger sample of participants and play sessions, in various combinations and longer durations, a really interesting quantitative model for how to effectively design for change could emerge.